So then we are back with more understandings on the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find a layer of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then these instructions, we find then Yeshayahu extremely important, because the Messiah himself and the Shilishim, or then the apostles, always quoted from Yeshayahu and other prophets. So then we find ourselves then studying and destroying the myth of, if you are from some sort of religion, then you can do whatever you want. Truly the Messiah never did what he wanted, because whatsoever then the instructions were then given, so the Messiah was then obedient. But then there is another factor that people sometimes they take for granted: the understanding of Sheol and the torment until comes the time of the end, known as vengeance or autumn feast. Let's understand then what Shimon, second Megillah of Shimon, or second epistle of then Shimon. Peter was then his nickname from the Greco translation, but his name never changed. His name was Shimon. Let's understand firstly then what Shimon has said. For if Elohim spared not those angels that did sin, but he cast them down, so then he makes these extremely clear, because he will to deliver them up to be kept for the judgment of the end. Let's try to understand these as a fact. When a person dies without the Messiah, without the understanding of the revelation, try to understand, salvation and revelation, those are related. Those are similar. You can only be saved if you are revealed. But not only revealed, you have to reveal yourself and then instructing others without taking credit for yourself. The Messiah said very precisely, he said, if a person does not bear fruit, then he's taken away at the end and burned with the others. So let's understand what Shimon has said. And if Elohim did not spare the former world as far as the previous instructions regarding then Sodom and the cities of the plain, then he, during the time of this understanding, preserved those from those awful places, such as Noah during his time, and then his family, 8 persons. Then obviously he brought the Vesuvius, and then the world was destroyed. Then he burned up the cities of Sodom and the cities of the plain, and condemned them by an overthrow, making them, this is extremely important, making them a demonstration to the wicked who should come after them. So we understand the end of the world is obviously as precisely as the Messiah has said, so as then to the end. Luke 1:7, for example, he explains. Shimon is explaining those layers, the Messiah was then explaining them. This shows us very important, because the soul of the person without the instructions are then set for destruction at the end. Torment takes place when a person dies without the Messiah and without tabernacling. This world is very brief. A person lives 70, 80, 90 years, sometimes 100. Comparing with 7,000 years plus, it is extremely brief. And as per the calculations, we are already after the 7,000, shortly after. Then this shows us the importance of reading the instructions and understand that this world will end. As Shimon has said, then the elements of this earth will be burnt with intense heat. He's explaining the layer in 2 Shimon, the 2nd chapter, and the Messiah speaking then in Luke chapter 1:7. When the Messiah was explaining the understanding related with the rich man and then the unfortunate gentleman, during his time he only experienced trials and tribulations, the Messiah explained this. Try to understand. He explained this after he came from the dead. Any prophecies, any explanations of then the time of the end related with vengeance via parables, via then the prophecies from the Messiah's own words, those were after he came from the dead. Why? Because he said, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons. Vengeance is afterwards. The Messiah completed the spring feast. Then he came from the dead. He spent a year with his people. Then he explained step by step while he was then participating in the feast. The autumn feast, he participated in it. He taught them, or he rethought them. Then as he was participating during his 12 months with his people, as he was with them, then he explained what goes on with the soul of the person while down there in torment. When the Messiah came, he came and he saved his people, and in turn he wanted his people to save the Gentiles, bearing fruit. Though they are mockers, though many of them they don't understand, they make fun of, they're always thinking somebody else then to put the blame on. But when they die without the Messiah, without tabernacling, it is straight down, as if you were then coming down from a building. The sensation in the spirit regarding then the evil spirit living in you that takes you down there when you die and leaves your soul down there in torment. It is only once then he explains the destruction of these souls. Try to understand, the souls are then in torment until the ending of this age, and then afterwards comes the destruction. And then later comes the autumn feast, as far as we read from Yeshayahu. And then there is a link with vengeance, the autumn feast, in the 65th and 66th verse, post-autumn feast. You can read for yourself. You can go by numbers. It was already explained. If you read from numbers and verses, then they are mixed. If you understand it by content and context, then you can separate. Then the Messiah himself was explaining this because the situation is extremely serious. The world, as the Messiah explained, was then given into relationships, and then they were having a feast, and then they were so busy doing their own things, and having a family, and having husbands, and having wives, and having trade. And try to understand. And then comes the end and destroys them. Luke. Make this very plain, because afterwards they are going to talk regarding then the so known gifts of the Spirit. It does not exist. Mark and Luke were Gentiles. They were not from the lineage. So then, as we read the Messiah himself speaking, and as it was in the days of Noah, there is a direct link of the layer from the Messiah in Luke and then 2nd Shimon. It is precisely what the Messiah was speaking of. So then, when the Shilishim, they were explaining the areas related with the restoration or the 1,000 years of the Messiah or the holy instructions, they said what the Messiah had pointed plus the link with the prophecies. Then later I'm going to study these more in depth. And as it was in the days of Noah, likewise it will be in the days of the revelation. Try to understand. For they were eating and drinking and taking wives and giving them to husbands until the day that Noah entered the ark, and destruction came upon them. And again, as it was in the days of Lot, they were eating and drinking and buying and having trade and planting, and they were building. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, then fire and brimstone came down from heaven and destroyed them. Try to understand these factors. The Messiah is explaining tabernacling. During the time of Noah, they were eating and drinking and taking wives and giving them to husbands until the day that Noah entered the ark. As we understand, they were not doing any kind of evil. And they were eating, they were drinking, they were having wives and families and so on and so forth, and they were destroyed. Because they did not understand tabernacling. So then, as it was during the time of Lot, so they were eating and drinking and then planting and then building and then having trade and buying. And the day that Lot went out, then fire and brimstone came down from heaven and destroyed them. Thus it will be in the day of the revelation, the autumn feast, the vengeance. So then, the world gives a false sense of security. Try to understand what the false Messiah does. When the cities were destroyed, the milta was stolen. And in this world, evil, unfortunately, steals it until the Messiah recuperate his holy cities. That's coming. And the first holy city on the land of Cush, as per the instructions of Yirmiyahu the prophet. Then, as we understand, in Corinthians, you find then the functions of the Spirit. There is no gift. There are no gifts. It is quite interesting because if you go to those religious establishments, you ask the regular person, what is your gift? And they don't have a clue. Mas only because I don't have any gift, that doesn't mean that they don't have them. Are you not a revealed person? If you are a person revealed and saved, how come you don't have any kind of a gifting? But then you hear many of these religious leaders, they simply give you then a list of behavioral, what you should do and what you should do not. It's always the same. You give your money and you receive then some sort of a personal understanding of the instructions. They take credit for it most of the time, because if they are giving you a behavioral list, means they have themselves placed then in a higher position, while not explaining precisely then what it means tabernacling. And then on top of it, they take your money, and then you do not respect then the holy feast of Sukkah. Only once a year give your tithes. Let's then understand 1 Corinthians 12. Then you find Shaliach Shaul, known as Paul for some reason. And then with the Spirit, some of them have miracles, or then the function. It is precisely then a set of 7 functions. Then you find miracles, you find tongues, interpretation of tongues, you find prophecy, discerning of spirits. These making a total of 7. Those are the functions then his people from the lineage, while they were gathering, as they were gathering around for the study of the instructions. Try to understand, the Spirit did not come from heaven straight upon them. Not at first. Came then Shaliach Shaul, he was then explaining of the completion of the spring feast. Then they would take out their Torahs, they would read what the Messiah did as per the instructions, the layers thereof, and then they did understand the spring feast was completed. And then Ruach HaKodesh, known as the Spirit, would come upon them and then would select them. During this time, you find in around the world many of these religious leaders, they are nothing but a cop-out of a familiar spirit. You know what familiar spirit means? An evil, junky spirit posing as. posing. They acknowledge there is a creator, but they deny the power. It's a cop-out. Though there are some of these people, they are very honest. They were simply not taught properly. But what they have thus far, it is a familiar spirit. When Shaliach Shaul was then over there in Ephesus, you find then many relations with the deity of the region, and then later on came a girl with a familiar spirit shouting very loudly, "Oh, these men came from then tabernacling. They are teaching then the ways of the Messiah," and so on and so forth. She did this for days. And Shaliach Shaul then was upset with it. And he did cast out the familiar spirit from the girl. Familiar spirits, they understand the truth. The only problem is they are scoundrels. They know the truth, but they don't teach you tabernacling. They teach you false religion, but not tabernacling. So then, he explains these. So then, precisely the Messiah said himself, at the end of times, then will to have many people. He did not say saviors, because there are no saviors. There is only a Savior, and he completed the spring feast as per the instructions. But then false leaders posing as tabernacling, because tabernacling is the Messiah. He is tabernacling. He was the very person related with tabernacling directly. So he's not speaking of a person. He's speaking of familiar spirits posing as. Because people, they gather together under a familiar spirit, they make themselves saved, they make themselves gifted, and they make themselves teachers. And Mashiach's got nothing to do with them. Because he said at the end, they will say, oh God, oh tabernacling, tabernacling. Have we not done these, that, and the other? And the Messiah said, I never knew you. You are from a sect of religion where you claim yourself be more important than tabernacling. So then, these 1 Corinthians 12, many people, they go to those religious establishments and they get brainwashed. They study of a leader, and this leader does not exist. What they do understand is the stealing of the miltha, stealing of life of somebody else. They recite evil in their minds and then they steal. That's why the Messiah said the enemy comes to steal and destroy. What is then the way out of this? Doing what Shaliach Shaul has mentioned. Renew the mind with the instructions. Simply read the instructions. understanding Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, understand if you die without the Messiah, it is straight down, one shot and one shot only. This means there is only one way out: the flesh. One way out of the flesh, and the soul finds itself in torment. There is no escape from there until the world then is burning with fire and brimstone, as precisely the Messiah explained, and then Shaliach Shaul, and then Shaliach Shimon. They said what the Messiah has said. So then at the end, you don't find yourself as giving relationships and then buying a home, buying a house, buying a farm, building a barn, and then planting and then harvesting, and then comes the fire and brimstone. You are in the midst of it. And you were caught unawares. Did not the Messiah said, be a wise person, understand tabernacling, because then if you build your understanding upon the instructions of the apostles and prophets, or then the instructions and the prophets and the Shilishim, then you understand yourself as a strong house then built upon the rock. Comes then the waters, and then you remain strong. If you do not do this, then the time you must understand tabernacling, then your mind becomes fugitive. You're trying to find evil in somebody's life, always mocking. But then you relink yourself with the world from a Messiah that does not exist. Thus the white horse with that Messiah, and he's a cop-out. Moses was very popular, and he was very simple. He received the holy instructions. He didn't understand what it meant of a city on a desert. Later on, the spring feast was completed, and then the son had taken place of his father. As the city should have remained closed and then secluded on a desert, and it did, then on a promised land most of the time wasn't, but should have. Then came the Messiah. He should have maintained the secludity or the seclusion. Then his people were then trained, and they were establishing holy cities throughout the world. The plan is extremely simple until 1009 of the regular calendar. Then came 1,000 years of deceit, where people came up with their own teachers, coming up with the stories of itching ears. Now the Messiah is returning to his holy cities, and then people don't understand. Later then I want to evaluate these more in depth and find areas where the Messiah himself said, very importantly, maintain his words. Understandably, he meant the layers of the explanation of the layers. As he was explaining in parables, understand the parable as a way of understanding the layerings of the prophets. This was the objective. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.